I recently found my 3 perfect lenses, and for the first time in a long time, I don't strive to own any other ones. I don't look around and shop for any ones. I'm not saying it's going to be the same for you, but for me, I'm done. I don't need any other lenses. I am completely satisfied with this tri-lens setup. The first lens, and by far my most used lens, if you're someone that is only going to get one lens, maybe you're getting your first camera in a lens, this is the one I would recommend above all other lenses. It is the Sigma 24-70 f2.8, and it's the one you're watching me on right now. There are a few different variations of this. I also had the Tamron 28-75 f2.8, and there's a Sony one that's also 24-70. I think it does pretty much the same thing, maybe slightly more expensive. For me, the Sigma one is perfect. I swapped from the Tamron one, which was a 28 at its widest, because I just wanted something slightly wider for something like this, where the 28 was pushed in just a little bit too much. I think any one of these 3 lenses, as long as it's this style and kind of focal range, is going to be the ideal lens to have as your first or only lens. It's also the one, like I said, that stays on my camera 90% of the time, and almost everything that you guys see going out onto this channel is filmed on this lens most of the time. It has an f2.8, which means I can get a super nice, sexy bokeh, blurred out background to isolate my subject or enhance the focus of the viewer on some certain details. It's nice in low light because of that f2.8. And I think the throw on the lens being 24-70 is prime for me. 24 is wide enough for me to capture anything that I want, like a studio shot like this, also like some sort of landscapes outside in the world. And the 70 is zoomed in enough for me to isolate my subject, maybe get some close-up details of certain things that I want to show, and it still creates nice compression and everything being at 70. The only downside I can say about this lens is it doesn't have image stabilization, but none of these style lenses do have. And if you're shooting on something like I am, the A7S III, you have in-body image stabilization anyway, and I shoot handheld on this all the time, and although you do see some handheld movement in it, it doesn't have any of the micro jitter or anything like that that you would expect from a lens that doesn't have IS. And that's because of the IBIS in the camera. It's not quite wide enough to get selfie style shots when you're like kind of holding your camera and talking to it. You could do it in a pinch, but it's just a little bit too close in on you to give the viewer a good idea of what's going on in your background. And for that reason, the next lens in the lineup and the next one I wanted was this Sony 20mm f1.8. And pretty much the only reason that I got this is so that I can get those wider shots, just slightly wider than the 24. Even though 24 and 20 doesn't seem that big of a difference, those 4mm on the wider end of your focal range actually make a big difference. And if you take a look at this 24mm shot versus this 20mm shot, you can see it actually includes a lot more in that frame. This one is an f1.8, which is awesome because while you're that wide, you're actually getting a really nice shallow depth of field. And if you are doing any self-filming like this, you are getting nice bokeh, separating yourself from the background while you can still include everything in the background and have it wide enough to get enough of you in that shot. I was tempted to not get this and actually go for something like a 16-35. They're very popular for this selfie style kind of shooting, but the reason I went for this is because the 16-35 comes in an f4, and it's not going to give you that nice bokeh in the background as much as this, unless you go for the f2.8 if you hate your money and want to get rid of it, because that lens is expensive in my opinion, and it's a very good one. And I think if you did have that one, I think you would also be very happy because you do have that versatility of the focal range. But after all, I decided to go with this one because even if I have the 16-35, the majority of the time I think I'm going to be shooting in 20mm, because if you're at 16, it creates quite a lot of barrel distortion. You're getting weird like stretch out on your face just because of how wide it is. And if I'm going to be using the 16-35 at 20mm, I would rather have the f1.8 than the f4 or the obnoxiously expensive f2.8. There's also a hell of a lot smaller. it's tiny in comparison to the 16-35, which is huge. I like the fact that this has a manual aperture ring, and it can also be de-clicked so that it's smooth, otherwise you can keep it like that. Super basic lens, really nice and small, not much going on here. It's a prime lens, and it's the only prime lens I have out of my 3 lenses, but I love this one, and if I'm ever shooting anything handheld, talking of myself, this is my go-to. The other areas where I find this one super useful is gonna be if I'm outside and I wanna capture some wider landscape style shots, really show the environment that I'm in by capturing a big field of view. This is gonna be awesome for that. Probably the lens I use second after the 24-70 that you guys are still on right now. My third and final lens, and definitely not an essential in your lens setup, I would say it would be completely fine with the other 2, even just the 24-70, but it's this. It's a Sony 70-200. I wanted something telly to shoot like some super like compressed shots, maybe some really zoomed in shots of surfing or something like that where you can't get close. This one is the f4. This does come in f2.8, also for an absorbent amount of money for that extra like 2 stops or something. And in my personal opinion, because of how zoomed in this is, you really don't need that higher f-stop unless you're shooting in the dark and you need it for low light. But in terms of bokeh and the blurry background, this is so zoomed in that you are going to achieve that blurry background really, really easy, even at f4. And if you take a look at a 70mm shot at f4 and f2.8, you can see that the bokeh is different, but it's not significant, and it's not worth paying 3 times the price or whatever just for that slightly little extra blurry background. Also, once you zoom in even more, you will struggle not to get that blurry background if you're filming a subject and your background is like somewhat far away. It's going to be completely blurred and thrown out just because of how zoomed in it is. I really like this one, and again, I don't use it that often compared to the other 2 lenses, and especially compared to this lens. But when I do use it, it does yield really cool results, and it gives a nice different style to your footage where it's super zoomed in and compressed. You can bring that background closer to your subject. Maybe if you have someone on the beach and you want to make those mountains look really big in the background, maybe you are shooting some sunset and you can make that sun really pop in the sky because of the compression and how it's going to pull that background in. Pretty standard lens. It's got a couple of different IS modes, so this one is image stabilized because it's so zoomed in. I still would only ever use this on a tripod because of how zoomed it is for video. For photos, sure, shoot it without, as long as you're keeping your shutter speed above something like 150 or 200. But for videos, I'm always on a tripod with this guy. This lens is the one I use least by far, and you definitely don't need it. And even on some trips, I actually won't take it with me, and I'll just take the other 2 because unlike the other ones, this one is actually really big and heavy. And if you guys got the f2.8 version, or if that's the one that you're interested in, which you shouldn't be, don't buy that one. It's even bigger. If you do want a tele lens, I would go for this one. The only regrets I have of this one is that there's a Sigma 100-400, if I'm not mistaken. And sometimes I feel like this isn't zoomed in enough. If I want to get something really far away, the 200 it's close and it's zoomed in, but not always as tight as I would like it to be. Something I do find myself doing is I'll sometimes put this on my crop sensor camera, my Sony FX30, which actually has a 1.5 crop, and it turns this 200 into a 300. And that's quite useful because then it's got a lot more throw, but even at 200, it looks really beautiful. So yeah, super simple one. Those are my 3 lenses that I use. I own a bunch of other lenses. I actually have a whole stack of lenses, but I don't use them. I use these 3, and the others sit in storage. I should probably sell them because they're not going to offer me anything that I need or want other than these 3. You could have a very different want and need for the lenses that you want to carry around in your bag. So this is just what works for me. You guys can find links to these lenses down in the description. They're affiliate links. This isn't sponsored, but if you click on those links, it helps me out anyway. Let me know what you think. Leave a comment and tell me what you think about these lenses. I'm super happy with them. Other than that, I will see you guys in the next one. Have fun. Bye.